First is going to be about the conditional update mechanism that we implemented to remove the API races. Okay. Uh, I will create a dev ref so all this can be easily accessed and explain what functionality is there. Okay. There is, as I mentioned earlier, there is one patch pending for the whole functionality because it needed a SQL Alchemy change, and that's already merged. And the patches add ordering possibilities to conditional update. The idea basically is to have a mechanism to implement compare and swap. It would be the equivalent of update from where. In our test, we determined that this was better than using logs or the select for update because it could create less deadlocks in the database. Okay. This introduces an abstraction layer for the conditional updates on the version objects. That's the way it should be used from a resource, but it can also be accessed directly from the database. I will be only explaining the version object layer. So the method for any version object is this. It has the arguments. The minimum is say what you want to change, basically the values with a dictionary. You can also specify with another dictionary which are the conditions that the database must meet for that update to go through. You can add more advanced filters, directly SQL Alchemy filters that you would usually will see how we would do it. And since the version object you are running this in could have dirty fields, which means fields that have been updated but not saved yet, you can also say if you want to save not only the values that you specify here, but also all the dirty fields that the version object has. And it accepts a session, which it's currently not being used. And the reflex changes field lets the conditional update method know that the values we have provided there should be used to update the version object. And the method returns the number of changed rows. So if it's zero, it means that the conditional update has actually failed. We don't throw exceptions, we just return zero. The basic usage could be, for example, changing the status to deleted, and the terminated that we change the value only if the status is available and if it's not in a consistency group. Now filters, and we would get the value if it succeeds. This is the most basic because you're just setting a couple of changes, but we can also use iterables. So we could specify a range of values that must be any of those, like the status must be available, error restoring, error extending, and the mechanism will automatically generate the SQL Alchemy query that uses the in operation. And this has been changed to also work with none, because in SQL you cannot do an in with a none value, so it automatically split it and that's an or. It's either equal to none or in any of the other values. It also accepts exclusion, so you can say none of these values. So in this case, we would say attached status is not attached. The volume would be a version object, so you have the not class, and you can use it with only one, or you could also use an iterable, so it's not attached or attaching, or you can add more, like we do with the status. We can use filters. You would define your filter in the SQL Alchemy API file, then you would define it in the DB API, so it can be used. For example, if a volume has snapshots, it could be checked with a query like that, a SQL exit, and then use in the API with DB volume has a snapshot filter, and we can even do the inversion directly in the API. That could be one way to create complex filters in the API and get the abstraction while doing the conditional updates. So when I'm saying changing just here expected values filters is because we are making the same call that we are doing here. It's values, expected values, and filters, so that would only be changing the specific variable. We can also build filters on the API directly because the version object will have a model field that it's a reference to the ORM model. So we can access the fields and use them, and it would automatically do the joining of the tables. For example, if we say change in a volume the status to restoring, and we say that the value of the volume status must be available, but we want to check something else like the status of the that's wrong. This should be backup. Okay. So, oh no, sorry. Yeah. This could be checking to restore. Sorry, this could be on a backup object. If you want to change it to restoring the backup status, only if the backup is available and the volume that is going to be restored upon is available as well. We would using this the volume model ID, making sure that it has the same value as the volume ID of the backup. For example, if you are restoring to the same volume, this would make a join query that could make sure that it could do it atomically. So you would only change the status of the backup to restoring if the volume that is referred by this backup is available. We can do it in the expected values, or we can use it as a filter. For example, like that. It's simple enough. Okay, using other fields, yes. One thing you can do using the model field from the version object is to actually use the current database values. For example, to not update the updated at field and to leave it with whatever it has. You don't use the data you have in the API. You use whatever it's in the database to change it. You can do a change in the status, the producer status, storing the current status, moving it without actually giving the value. And you can use it together with filters to create more complex things like assigning a value based on the current database values easily. For example, to increase the in-use value by the volume size. So, and that is wrong because, sorry, this should be quota.models.inUse. Sorry. That way we would be using the actual value in the database. So this one and this should be the same, like here. And we would only increase it if the value in the database at the moment that the transaction is happening, it's within the allowed. It doesn't go beyond the maximum usage we allow. So this would allow us to do it atomically instead of getting current quota in use values and then updating without knowing if someone else has changed it in between and without needing to create a longer transaction. Because yes, we could do this just creating a transaction, but then you would have to also move the transaction, the abstraction of the transaction would be moved up to the API.
Yeah. Actually guarantee that nobody did something in between, they could have changed it and then changed it back.
Change it. Yeah, but in here you don't care if they change it. You're just basing your changes on whatever is currently on the database. You can do whatever in between. I'm going to say only update in-use value. So assign in-use value to whatever you have plus 10 gigabytes only if the current value, I don't care what it is, but the current value should be, okay, yeah, should not exceed you could look at this like in use plus volume size less or equal than the max usage I allow. I don't care if someone else has changed it in between. If this is true, we are fine. We can increase it because the other one would have done the same thing. I don't know if I'm explaining it.
It's not the same thing as a transaction. You can't do something and then have some logic and then do something else and guarantee that no one is.
Yeah, it's not a transaction. Sorry?
Transactions don't go through that hurdle. I went through this very slowly with Amrit the other day on the quota. If you read the last quota group, minutes for detail. But using the transaction isolation level with dot, you can't, for example, do select. You couldn't do these atomic updates in a transaction. Check it, then change it in a transaction. If somebody else is going to change it under you between the check and the change.
Oh yeah, but that may be because you're not setting in SQL Alchemy the fetch back the value and things like that. Because sometimes SQL Alchemy, but how it works, it has the value in memory, so it uses that. You have to change something. I don't remember now. I have it in one of my patches.
To get some of the atomic transaction, you were using select update. You were using update where, which is fine. But to do that same thing in a transaction as a series of steps, you've actually got to change the isolation level of the database.
Yeah.
You can't just do it for one query, and if you change the isolation of the database, your performance structure you get deadlocked.
Yeah.
So we don't do that.
Yeah. But yeah, the idea is not to do transactions per se, like check one, open a transaction and start checking things and then make the change. The idea is you already know what you want. You know the conditions that the database must meet for it to happen. So just make one request like change the status if everything it matches. For example, deleting, you can avoid it. You cannot have a snapshot. It must be available. It must, unless you're forcing it. So what you do is you build your filters and your required values based on the request, and you say if it's forced, okay, I don't care about the status. But if it's not a forced operation, the status must be within these values. So what you do is you build up.
The catch is you have to put all of your checks in the conditional update, and then it works.
Yeah, that's the idea. Basically, instead of what we were doing before, which was get the database value, check the status. If it's not okay, return an error. And instead of having a lot of if else, if and raise error, what we do is based on the request, we build all the conditions, the filters, and whatever we need, and then fire one request to the database to do the update, and then check if it has been successful. If it's not, we would return, as I mentioned in the previous session, a generic error because we don't really know which of the conditions we have set actually failed. And originally, the patches would actually create a loop. If I have failed, I will start checking one by one if I know why this has failed. But then you could get race condition when things change and suddenly you say, okay, according to the database, I should succeed because someone has just changed the status in between. So you have to try again. So it was a loop. None of us like to have a loop in an API just to check, to return a perfectly matching error. So we just return like, okay, we couldn't proceed with the operation, and the status must be checked, that the status is this, and there is no attached volume there.
What's the HTTP?
Sorry?
What's the HTTP?
Oh, that depends on it could be returning basic. No, not that one. Yeah, I think it is. Sorry? Yeah, I think we have the deadlock retry. I would have to check because it's been a long time since I wrote this. I wrote this like 7 months ago, so I'm a little fussy on the specifics, but I think I did have the retry on deadlock mechanism in place. Okay, we can also set conditional value setting with the case class in the object version. It's basically the equivalent to the SQL case. For this one, you need to use SQL alchemy filters. You cannot do the way we were doing it before. Here we can see an example where you say, if the status is available, this one is from migration. This is actual code we have. If the status in the volume is available, we change it to maintenance. If it's not available, leave it as it is. So here we can see the mechanism to use case together with using a field from the database to change one of the values. You could add more cases to here, and you could not have an else. It's quite flexible in the way. Okay, the reflect changes that we saw earlier, I was saying that it actually updates the version object if you wanted to. It may have performance implications, so it's important to know this, because if you're using case, or if you're using a database field in the assignment of a field, it would, the conditional update method doesn't really know what the real value in the database is. So it will fetch the value from the database back instead of just making the changes in memory. No, that's yeah.
That fails, right?
What?
You only do the get when it fails.
No. If it fails, I don't care about, because it has not changed.
Right.
If it has succeeded, and we want to load the values, and in the field, in the values, I have either a case of a field operation, then I have to reload, because if not, I just use the dictionary you just gave me, and I assign it to the version object, and we're good. But if you use a case like the previous one, how can I tell if I have left it as it was, or I have changed it to maintain it? I have no clue. So it is important to know this. So if you're using like one of these mechanisms, case, or using the fields, and you don't really care the value that is in the database, I change it. I don't care. As long as I have succeeded, I know I can move on. Then you probably want to set it to false, so you don't get an extra database access. Well, the thing is that not really, because you would only be getting the values, not the conditions, because what you get is the values that you have set in the version object, not the conditions that you place. For example, if I say this must not have attachment or snapshots, that's a filter we saw earlier, that's a SQL exists. So you would get the value, you would see that it has failed, but you don't get that it has the snapshots pending from it. And even if you got it, you would maybe everything would match because there was a race, something in between changed. That's what original implementation had a loop. It's like, okay, I have read it back, I'm checking everything, and suddenly everything says that it should have worked. So let's try again, because I cannot report error without saying that there is actually something wrong, because everything looks fine. And then you would try again, and maybe it fail again, and maybe it was crazy. So we removed the loop, and we just return a generic error. Okay, there was MariaDB. Actually, this is the SQL Alchemy change that was needed. I mentioned before, it's because on MariaDB, the order of the fields in the SQL matters. So SQL Alchemy could just generate an update, for example, with the previous status, setting it to current status, and change the status. And this would, basically, that's the query that SQL Alchemy would generate when you set when you do the earlier conditional update. You would say previous status is equal status equal retyping. Okay, this one should be changed. Sorry, yeah. In what? I don't know if it's well defined. I can tell you that it doesn't work the same way in MySQL, in MariaDB, in Postgre, in SQL Leak. What do you mean?
If SQL doesn't define that behavior, how can we expect it to work?
Well, basically, no. Actually, we know that MariaDB works a very specific way, which is keeping the order. We know Postgre is smarter, and that's other thing. So what we do is the SQL Alchemy patch we worked on was to be able to force the order you are setting the SQL.
By issuing multiple statements?
No, sorry, that statement is wrong because this is the wrong order, okay? If status equals retyping goes before previous status, then that's true in MariaDB.
The order of updates.
Yeah. Is the order actually matter in SQL?
I know.
I've never actually tried this.
Yeah. Imagine my face when I run into, it works in Postgres, it doesn't work in MariaDB. Why the hell it doesn't work? And I get to how SQL Alchemy generated it, and I start poking around, and I see that MariaDB, MySQL, they actually respect the order. So what we did was, okay, then let SQL Alchemy allow us to set the order, and
if the language doesn't tell you what's supposed to happen when you put this assignment and this assignment versus the other way around,
yeah,
we should support that. We should use that.
okay.
We should make sure that our code doesn't try to do this.
I should probably look into how SQL defines it.
It's just something that I've never tried to run it. Like, just from looking at it, not all the time, I just wonder if the language actually
I will look it.
This is one of the reasons I wanted a torch test, so if we're supporting a new DB or new DB version, if you've got things to kick on, so we'll exercise things like this and just check if they're right.
That actually would be very useful in this
Whoa. Yeah, but even if they fix it, then what do? You either don't implement it or you have to also do it because there may be all versions. So yeah, I know what you're saying because that's what we should do. If it's broken, we need to go to the DB and fix it to make it right, basically. But we would still be in the same situation. Yeah. Why? More importantly, why? If we know that all the versions work this way, we can already take that into consideration. Oh,
minor version is great, because it's not part of the well-defined.
well, the thing is that they either, in general, they either respect it, in which case we would be safe, or they are smart enough to know the order of the assignment, which is what I do as well.
Which is important, because if we don't want 4.02, we could change that just because the final is optimized for collection. And then if it's a 14, then that's a minor version. Just people do after. If it's not something that the database that like defines officially for the data, then the way they behave, you change it in a minor version.
The question is, do you want previous status to be what status was, or do you want previous status to retype it?
Well, do you mean there's no, what do you mean there's no way to know? Usually you use a field, you don't want the new value. You would have set the new value. That's why Postgres does it that way. It's like, if you want the previous status to be, yeah, probably it's not. I will check it to confirm. Sorry, I can.
Right, the scary case is the Postgres case, where they don't care where you start from the field. They have to be able to define it.
Yeah, that is. If they respect the fields, we are safe because we are ordering them, so it's not a problem. You know what I mean? I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is that if that's the problem, that they start respecting the order, we don't care. It works. Because we are setting the order in conditional update. We actually check first. You can specify the order. You could, we automatically set the order to first make the updates on the other, if you are using other ORM fields. So if you're using database fields, those changes go first. If you're using the case, those changes go after.
I know what you're saying. I think what Tarzan was trying to say is that this could be a bug in Postgres, that the one of the feature that you have to take advantage of.
No, we're not taking advantage. I'm not making any assumption on which database. I mean, I'm ordering always. I'm not saying if it's Postgres, I don't order because he's doing it right or the way I like it, and I'm ordering only for MariaDB. I'm not. I'm ordering it always. But yeah, I will look into it anyway and see if it's actually okay. There are some things that during, for example, we can, if it's only supported in one of the database, we cannot really use it. For example, multi-table updates are not supported by, I think it's Postgres. Yeah, it's not supported. MariaDB supports it, so we cannot actually use it because
We should probably walk out the code then, stop people writing stuff that only works in MariaDB.
Ooh, that's really, really difficult. I mean, what would happen is that you would get an error in the gate because the Postgres directly complains. It's like,
If we actually started the code in the gate,
yeah, but the thing is that it's not that easy to actually tell if you're doing a multi-table update. So I can look into it and see if I can add that safety, like to check when it comes in and just give an error, like raise an exception, like this is not what, even if it works in MariaDB, this is not, we don't accept.
we don't get like most code in the gate unless it's I can easily see from the animation that on MariaDB, seeing it works, it gets merged, we don't find the problem until much later when someone exercises that bit of code on Postgres.
Yeah, you see. Okay, I will try to see if I can add it to check the values that are provided, to check if they refer to different tables, and if they do, just fail. Okay, I'll look into that.
If it's impossible, it's impossible. If it's possible, it will be a good thing to have.
Yeah, yeah, totally right.
You should need to plan for this session, right?
Sorry?
Do we have an Etherpad for this session?
Yeah, there is one.
Apologies.
It's oh, okay. Yeah.
We have them all referenced there.
Yeah.
Be that next tab up there. I'll show that.
So when we are creating a new object version, we need to have some considerations so that conditional updates actually work. So we have restrictions on the naming of the version object, the ORM class, and the basic get method, because all these are used by the conditional update. So for in the case of the classes, they must have the same name. So if you have volume, you also have a version object called volume, exactly with the same name. If you don't, for whatever reason, that's not what you're doing. When creating a new version object, you need to go. We have a mechanism to accept exception in the naming, but you have to add it to the mapping exception. Same thing with the get method. We assume that we change the volume, the class name into snake format, and we add underscore get, and that's what we are expecting the method to be called. If it's not, we also need to add it to the exceptions. Otherwise, conditional updates will not work. But it's quite easy because we only have a couple of exceptions. Mostly, we always follow this anyway. So it's just something good to know. And I don't know, what did I do? And okay, well, I don't know if there was something here, or probably I just made a mistake in the, yeah. Okay, that's basically functionality that we have and how you can use it. I don't know if there are any questions on anything. Sure, sure.
I mean, how Cinder specific is the implementation of this layer?
Oh, it's.
Are you using version objects?
But even if you don't use version objects, this is basically done in 3 or 4 methods. Well, 2 classes, the node and the case classes defined in the SQL Alchemy API file, and a couple of methods that are agnostic because they require just to get a model and get the values. So.
I guess what I'm wondering is there any chance this code would have been turned into a library used? So once you copy paste it,
yeah. Yeah, it would be a really small library, but yes, it can be done. Because basically you could have a version object mixin that could add the conditional update mechanism, and then you could get the yeah, it could be done. Yeah. Yeah, I'm finished actually, and I need to run. Yep. Yep. Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, we have 2 back-to-back recap sessions.
Yeah, all the slides are in the Etherpad. The link is in the Etherpad, so it's easy to jump.
How's this thing work? Pins to me. Search and go.
There's a toggle switch on the top.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, so in Mitaka, we merged API microversions into the API server. That makes people happy, that's good.
filet mignon, right? So in case you want to send me something in the mail, like John got cheesecake. So what's implemented? Well, first, I'll kind of operate with the assumption some people might not even know what it all does or means. API microversions, you could almost think of it as API versions. It's basically a way to change the API. One of the benefits is you can change it in a way that is backwards incompatible. So it would break an existing deployer, but it won't, because the client who's asking the API for something will have to explicitly ask for a version. Instead of using endpoints, it uses an HTTP header.
Do I have any restrictions on how incompatible my change is?
Yes, because you can't break the previous API versions.
Okay, so that's code restriction.
That's the convention that's been, going on, is we can't break previous versions. And then there was talk about, well, how long do we have to carry things? And I think in Tokyo, at this cross service group, it was like you have to support everything forever. People who are using older deployments were fairly insistent. So that's just sort of a convention that is not a problem anymore, because we can change the API version with micro versions. And
Well, it is a problem because you can't change things in such a way that they do things to break the previous version. You need your internals to be the same shape.
right. We absolutely will continue to support everything we support today, say V2 or V1.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and microversions has decorators. I'll show some code here, because we've merged a couple of versions. This does allow changes that originally, and I have to change the dev ref. Originally, we thought, well, we'll only bump the micro version when we have a breaking change, or there's a clever decision tree schema that says, if I did this, do I need to change the micro version? Yes, no. Am I adding a new payload? Am I changing a parameter? Yes. But the API working group has since merged a doc that says, always bump the micro version for every API change. So I'm assuming we'll want to adopt that convention, and that makes the decision easier, because there's been debate and reviews. Do we need a new micro version for this? I don't know, but the API working group's current paradigm is you always bump the version for any API change, even if it's not going to break something. So adding a new API would require a micro version change, according to this paradigm. I guess. I mean, I don't really follow all the debate.
If you have an API, you need a microversion problem, because you don't know if that API is there.
Well, that's one thing is, yeah, if you add
having a version that can have the API and not have the API, you go for the UX.
Yeah, I didn't read all the reviews and the working group's decision of why, but that's one reason is you can easily tell if the new API is supported by check conversion.
I think there's one notable case if the API change and actually want to fix it in the whole microversion,
Sure.
then you would just check in the bug fix, not on the microversion. That would only ensure that if the old version was broken.
Right.
Fixing the bug.
Right.
That's two holes, right? With the new from my API.
Which is what? If a bug fix does.
We prefer 500 HTTP error for you had for binary input, and now we are returning 400, I think. Does that require?
Yes.
Also, okay. So
that would have required it under our old paradigm, because somebody might have a script that looks for 500. Now you're not giving them 500. So
we need to upgrade the
yes.
Is there something saying we gotta bump it for every change, or can we bump it one per cycle? Because
Well, the idea is people can deploy from head.
People can pull with it. Do we really support what all the growth? Okay.
with the support of more people are doing it.
Just the challenge I already see is we've had several patches, they're all keeping API.
It's a race to get in
Yeah,
there.
oh, well, that one got it.
But you gotta rebase, I mean,
Yeah,
it's really usually,
it would just be.
it would be easier, but then you also have to like, then you have to cut up, yeah, like, okay, no more API changes because we're bumping the version. Anyway, that's, again, the paradigm being, you can always pull from 10, so. The idea is we'll never have a new endpoint. We'll just keep bumping the microversions until microversion 10,000 or what is it? Yeah. So that's part of it is you don't have to say, okay, now we've got enough API changes. We want to add a new endpoint every couple of years and have people adopt it. You never have to change the endpoint again. So it's across all APIs. The number increments pretty quickly. We merged 3.1 and 3.2, and there's patches out there that'll add a 3.3. We'll probably have, I don't know, 10 or 20 changes per release. How many do you guys have now? Yeah.
So there's always just going to be that last number.
So we're at 3.2, and it'll go up. That micro version number is the dot, the fractional part will be the one that increases. 3.3 is in flight. There's a couple patches. They all have 3.3. The first one in is 3.3. The next one's got to go to 3.4. So that's something to watch out for as reviewers. Is
I think one thing worth saying, if you see a patch get approved and then fail to merge because the mic version merges, don't feel shy about putting a new patch, even if it's not your patch. If the thing got approved and you're going to merge anyway, don't feel the person should be possessive about their patch. Just get it in, get it approved. If we always bounce back with an author, we're lagging far more than we need to. Don't let people be possessive over their patch.
so. We added a new V3 endpoint. That was a safety feature. We didn't want people to hit the V2 endpoint expecting that the server supported microversions, because if you ask for the microversion on an older server, pre-Mitaka, it'll just ignore the header. So you would not know that you had failed to get the microversion you asked for in an older Cinder API server. So we added V3 endpoint, and we added the support and server for microversion. In Newton, we've got 3.1 and 3.2 added to the server. And in Newton, we added Cinder client support for V3 and Cinder client support for microversions, which is not the default. So that's something we can talk about, but you don't have to talk about it here. But at some point, we will probably want to move the default API version to V3, API endpoint to V3.
How that would be able to test anything in Tempest, right? Anything new?
If we don't move the endpoint, I guess, I don't know if the Tempest has a way to tweak it. DevStack now supports the V3 endpoint.
That's not the default, right?
What's that?
It's not the default.
What is not?
Default.
It's not the default.
In Mitaka, then. Yeah, that's
I don't know the internals of Tempest. You can't say we use this endpoint. You can. In Tempest. Okay. Good. Cool. So there's. Cool. So that's the question: is when would we change the default? I don't know, but that's something to think about at some point. If we could think about the next release, it doesn't matter, I guess. Right. So
we need to avoid the mistake we made in the past with the endpoint where people are hanging behind for a long time. Because right now V3 is functionally identical to V2.
right.
So
There's no real reason not to make V3 the default because it's functionally identical to V2. It doesn't hurt anything. It's just a matter of confidence.
We still need to work with to get people to move up. Like we saw in our session of still people on V1.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
Unfortunately, we get deployers to come along sometimes.
Yeah.
They might be a little more further.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and now with the microversions, they want any new functionality, they have to.
Right, every single thing we add will require V3. So you're not gonna get any new features in the API without it, so. I guess that's not motivation, then you.
that's the only answer. Practice, cities if you want to run catalogs, because they're just not.
I think the other thing is there's several libraries out there. A lot of them still just have V1. I guess if there's anybody listening, motivated, we can have ambassadors or whatever, other projects that are implementing these cloud libraries to help them move. That might help as well.
Even a list of all the cloud libraries that will be similar.
I saw that somewhere, yeah. It'd be nice to at least in each of those projects and say, hey, just so you know, you're gonna want to do this.
The Cinder client support's there, but we haven't released it. So whenever we do our next Cinder client release, it'll be there.
Please test now.
What's that?
Please test before we.
Asking people, yeah, we've been tested by the reviewers, some people. Sure, yeah, please test. Here's some examples of how it should be used. I'll go over a couple of them if we want, but there's 3.1, 3.2 merge. There's some stuff in flight. And
Look at one of those.
yeah, I'll bring up some of that stuff. I just started in on a couple. I also added the DevRef, this original patch, which had some things that have been changed. So the original patch isn't exactly what's in Cinder now, but you can at least see what was changed. And I actually made a couple screencasts, which I need to find a way to get it on the Cinder channel. I've got it on YouTube now. We'll figure that out. And I'll do some more of those based on what I think people would like to know. But if anybody has anything that they don't understand or you want to figure out testing patterns, things like that, I'll try to get that up there. So I'll show you some stuff. That's bad. Let's see if I can make it visible.
Make that bigger.
I mean, is that okay? Uh-oh. Uh-oh, my internet, my workstation's not accessible. No, it's at home. Come on. Yeah. It's passwordless, you can't get on it. So we're still using V2. And if you go to V3, it's identical to V2, and you don't need, there's no additional header on any of this. Nice. So V3 will always look like V2, and then what microversions is a new HTTP header, and the official OpenStack working group header is OpenStack API version. No, they wanted to get rid of that. Caps don't matter, but I think it is officially capital V in the code. I think it might matter in the code or some testing, but it doesn't matter when you send it HTTP. And so they also wanted to do one header for all services, which of course Manila has not complied with. They're stubborn about these things. But they're already in, and we changed it before we got in. So it'll say volume, and you'll have your micro version 3.1. And you can't see any difference, that's list, but basically that is how you will access the new version of the API that has the 3.1 functionality, which was yes. So if you ask for something the server does not support, it says not supported, and it gives you the maximum. So you can use that in your client. The Cinder client, I have a patch in flight to do get version. I think I actually patched it in here. Cinder API version. This is not merged, but that's just a yeah. So on the client side, you still need to OS volume API. Ask for whatever you want.
Another place where we should update the default.
Well, that's just, that's up to the community. Is there any reason not to update the default? It's baby confidence at this point. So if we want to wait, we wait. Anyway, so that's in flight. It just makes it a little easier to figure these things out. And what I will do next is automatic version negotiation between client and server, which could be used by other clients. I think when we start changes to Nova to consume new versions, we'll probably want this automatic version negotiation, especially because that has it's a one-time performance hit. When the Nova client is instantiated, it'll figure out the highest version supported by both the server and the client and make requests at that level. You guys do this in Manila, right? You can request an older version, sure. But anyway, that code will be in there. I think it will probably be turned off by default because I think people will resist. It is on by default because it is an extra trip. Client does just this, gets the version, calculates the highest version between client and server, and uses that going forward. And if it's just the CLI, it's going to be doing that every time you type a command. It's pretty efficient if it's an instantiated client like Nova. It's not a big deal.
So we should talk in the discovery talk actually about caching this information in the catalog as well.
Yeah, and do you guys have caching? I think Ironic has in the client this version negotiation. They cache the file using something dog. There's a little Python caching library that will save the highest version, and then you never use that, and it refreshes whatever frequency you want, once a day or however you reasonably feel your API is going to change. I think this is a library that invalidates it. I think it looks at the file. It's a file, and it caches the value there, and it says, is the file older than the time you configured it to be? If it's not older, you use it. If it is, it's just a quick, clunky, basic mechanism. Yeah, and I I'll code that up. That's down the road, but that's something that will allow It's automatic version negotiation in a more efficient way. So yeah, so you put your version. If it's not supported, you get an error. In the future, other services we presume will be used. Implement this method. Right now, nobody does. I mean, Compute and Manila have microversions, but they don't use this header convention. But you know, someday it will, and we're already ready for that, and it just works. We ignore all the other stuff. So I can show you some of the changes that people have done. Let's see. This is the 3.1 patch, adding volume image get support for is visible or something like that. So there's changes specific to the patch, and then there's changes you'll have to make every time. So we have a max API version field, which is currently 3.2 in every patch. That's the one you'll look for to increment properly. And let's see. So in API/API versions, I think we'll look at that in a sec here. So every request object has an API version request object, which has major version 3, minor version, whatever the micro version is. And so you can use that request objects API version request field to toggle on different logic. So just like this patch does, it sets the version request, and then it just says, you know, if it's greater than 3.1, we do stuff. You can do it that way. I'll show you another patch that uses a matches function where you can say if it matches, if it's in between these versions, do one thing. If it's greater than this version, do another. There's all that functionality. That's not the decorator. That's just there's an object API version request. It has a value. Is it greater than 3.2? Do stuff. Is it less than 3.2? Do other stuff. However you want to do that in the code. So that way, the decorator itself decorates methods. That anything that inherits from the controller can be decorated in a way that also toggles this logic. But then you're rewriting the whole method. So it's fine if you, yeah. But if you add a new method, that's what you would use, the decorator, which I can show you. What's that? You don't want to rewrite the whole method. No, I think that's the right way to do it. The decorator is good if you add a new method, or if the change is, you know, it's just a matter of what looks better. So you bump the version and change some version history stuff. That's the things to look for. And that's about it. So there's different ways to do this. I don't think anyone has actually used that matches, that decorator. It only exists. I can show you that right here in the dev ref. So this part about when do I need new micro version, that's all going to go away because you're just going to bump it every time. So if you have a new method, you can use this decorator, which is in WSGI controller, and basically saying, you know, API version 3.4 means if you're 3.4 or above, do new thing. If you're not, it will be unsupported. It'll fail. And changing the behavior, you could still do it at the method level, but really what Nate did is probably going to be more efficient, because then you're actually changing just, you know, a line of code or something by. Yeah. Just in a if statement. So that's just a convention. That's the you know, the execution of the code is going to be the same. So there is a function that is part of API version request object called matches that allows you to say, you know, if it matches 3.1 to 3.5, do something else. 3.6 to 3.10, do something else. Just different ways of doing the same thing. There's another change. Well, the only thing about the decorator is it's just a convenient way to version the whole method. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fine. As a convention, I think that's fine to say that. I don't know what. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well. No. No. You're right. I mean, it's pick one. I don't know.
But this one is like really explicit, and the other one looks like an equals jacket. That's very the match.
Right.
So maybe that's a bad thing. I mean, maybe that's bad. I don't know.
It shouldn't even be.
You know. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing of it is, we're figuring it out. So what do people like or not like, or, you know, we can.
I prefer the explanation.
Somehow we need to make the built-in more clear. Like it just needs to declare the intent. Right?
Yeah.
The matches is
It doesn't. Right. Right. No, I agree. Well, personally, I think that's the matches is a convenience, and all it does is does stuff like this under the hood. But that looks better to me. I mean, that's.
Understood. A single method will look bad, but we just need to maybe it's probably just another stupid programming name. Right?
Yeah.
We just need that.
No, I think we should bike shed on it for a while right now. But no, I'm just that I personally think that looks good because it tells you exactly what you. I mean, that's easy to understand.
Yeah.
But
I find that very readable, and the helper method not so readable. So I vote for using that, doing a hacking check to say don't use that. Yes, no, totally.
yeah, well, there's no need to put a hacking check. I mean, if we find that the matches has absolutely no value and we never let it in, we just take it out, right?
Yeah.
But we should probably leave it for now because we probably don't know what we don't know yet. I mean, maybe patterns that it works better for. I don't really know. We could look at someone else's, like Manila's implementation. No. The decorator is there for that. Yeah. It's whether you do that or whether you matches API version request dot matches 3.1. Anyway. Right. Okay. How about any questions about this right now, or?
I think that I don't know, a bit afraid of this. Let's say I started my application to use 3.10, and then I want something that's in 3.15, but the changes between 10 and 15 are contain subtle changes to functions.
You just want the one change, but you want everything else
And
to
that
stay.
means that I would need to figure out what changes between 10 and 15. Check out my code if I'm using it. Then look how will it break?
Yeah.
And go.
Yeah.
And also, we need to make sure that people don't automatically use the highest version.
Well, right. So don't do that. There is a latest version you can request, which is the highest version, which is like for testing and useful for, but don't use it.
The other thing is you set this version per call. So unless you need the new, yeah.
Well, when you can set it when you instantiate your client.
So,
Depending on how you write your client.
So now it's probably context.
It is per call, but with, you know, with the Cinder client, when Nova uses this, they'll set it when they.
Somehow forced by the developers to log what they change between.
Yeah, that's yeah. It's somewhere back here. But think of it this way.
Like ridiculously hard. So like,
That's something
But
that's.
for most normal users, you want to be setting the version per call, because you're going to want the old stable behavior. You're not going to want it to change again. So set your version per call.
There's always.
Yeah, no really special case, and even Node, I think, might end up wanting to do per call, to be honest. But for normal users, you're going to want to set this per call, not per client. You might do the version negotiation at client startup, so that you get an MMS back without having to round trip. But per call, you're going to want to say which version you're using, so you get the right semantics. Or no version, because for most things, you usually want the V2.
So it is a bit of a problem that you know when you decide to go up, you get it all, and so if it contains a lot of backwards incompatible changes, you got to figure out all those.
Hopefully, we're not changing too much that will impact your use case, but yeah, it's something you'll have to be aware of for sure.
You probably, for normal users, you probably don't want to specify a version at instantiation code. It's that simple. You probably don't want to do that. It's probably the wrong pattern for everybody using Nova, and it might even be the wrong pattern for Nova if you've got the long run.
So I think we should be just very restrictive about the converting compatible changes. So microversions doesn't allow us to change everything and remove fields from the API. Unless there's a good reason.
Well, you can still do that. You can remove. You can do backwards incompatible changes. That's the.
Yes, but if it's that.
If we don't have to make it not backwards compatible.
No, we've just got to get you to use this the right way. And bumping up using the new API for everything is just wrong. It's never the right thing to do. You're never going to want to do it. Specify your version on your calls, or no version, get the V2 behavior, which is what most people want anyway.
another part of what the negotiation version is when you start the client is that it tells you what version that we have, and that's what you're supposed to fight against. Your calls have to go against that, the logic of that. You want certain semantics, and you want to make sure that the server supports those semantics.
So you,
It's not the other, it's not the other.
It's not the other way.
You're right, it's not. You're forcing your devs to always use, the latest, greatest version that I just deployed on my cloud. I have to be able to support the things that my developers want to use.
the whole point of microversion is you can write your client stuff once, and if you never need a new behavior, you can keep calling the old version forever, and it will always behave the same. That's the whole point. And you should always write your stuff to the version you need. Then it doesn't matter what the new version is.
Yeah. The big gap is just what was pointed out, is if you want to make a big leap, you're getting it all, and you have to make sure you're aware.
Never do that. I'm saying that's always the wrong pattern from a client.
I don't know.
Well, if you release a new version of your app, then if it reaches, you update the microversion, you test it against the new app, and you start running.
But for every call site, you want a specific set of semantics, so you should specify which semantic you want at the call site, because that's very important. But not the client instantiation site, because you reuse the client for several calls.
Well,
That's the way it looks a lot.
yeah. Nova's going to know that we want, we want to use the semantics that are in Mitaka or something. Well, better to say Newton. So it's going to instantiate and ask for 3.12.
But
let's talk.
We're coming out new semantics to say the migration bit. The migration API call is actually used in 3 different places in Nova for 3 different purposes. And they might want new semantics on one side and not new semantics on the other at some point. That's a totally realistic scenario. You don't want to have to go and rewrite 3 call sites.
I doubt that will ever be done in Nova. I don't think they would want to say, ask for this version when you run this bit of code and ask for a different version when you run that.
I think they will.
They don't put that in Nova right now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, no, because there's not that many things in microversion.
Well, we'll be figuring, that's obviously something to figure out.
All right, well, we can continue
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So ping me if you have questions, if you're writing a patch and you have questions or whatever.
Can we quickly go over rolling upgrades?
So the next session is about also about role recovery. So I just try to focus on the code and developer aspects now, and then we'll just think about next steps. Okay, so I'll try to quickly give an overview what's that. Or maybe that's for the discussion. Yes, I can only talk about what's changed from the developer's perspective. So we have changes in the guidelines related to migration, migrations. Basically, we should be very careful with any migration involving alter or drop operations because we need to keep the compatibility with the previous services. So when we apply the schema changes, older services should continue to be able to run the DP. And if we remove a column the older service we're relying on, then we are breaking compatibility. Another thing is online data migrations, which are related to how we cannot make updates in the migration, basically, because this can take a lot of time if the HTTP table is big enough, and this costs the table to be locked for a long time, then timeouts in the DP, so that's downtime, which we actually want to avoid. We need to keep the RPC API compatibility, and that's done by RPC versioning, which we are now doing in a more strict way, and also version objects, which version what we send over the wire. And yeah, we need to make sure that that our logic is able to run with all the services in the deployment. Okay, so that's the steps. So I will keep that. Yeah, we don't have CI. Yeah, okay, so yeah, that's my function. Okay, so now in details about the migration. So when we want to add something to the DB schema, then that's easy. We can do that. Expensive DB migrations are fine because they won't be breaking any older services. Things, yeah. So that's the common sense I've mentioned. So older services will ignore that column. So if we base some logic on a new column or new thing in the DB, other services will ignore it, and we need to make sure that left for that. It's more complicated with the droplet migration, so they are allowed, but we need to do that through multiple releases. So, for example, if we want to drop a column that is not needed now, that maybe it's used, but won't be needed in the future, then we in a release where we're making the change, we should stop using that code and remove it from the SQL object. So in case I'm using the current release, Newton won't need to rely on that column, so won't select it from the database. And in the next release, we can merge the migration that will delete that column. So that's one deleting. It's even more complicated when we want to alter the column or convert any data through the migration. So in master, in Newton, we need to create a new column that will keep the new data or the moved data, or will have the alter operation writing. Then we start writing to it. So the Newton version need to write both old place where the data was stored and the new place where the data was stored. Because yeah, we should still read from the old code, and that's to make sure that all their services can run in the deployment and will find all the data they need. Yeah, if we are moving the data from one place to another, we shouldn't do that in the migration itself. We should do online data migration. I can show some code of that. So basically, the idea is that as we are still reading from the old place, we are able to move the data to the new place through the release before we upgrade from that's in M. Then before we are upgrading to M, we should be have all the data converted, moved from one place to another. And I have some code for that. I don't really know what I did. Okay. So basically, this is basically that's a new DB API method. So in this case, I'm taking the real world example. So that code was to imagine Mitaka. It actually wasn't there. And basically, what it does is moves the volume types, which on the consistency group there's a property called volume type. So we abuse that and allowed to add multiple volume types, separating them by comma. And the correct way to model that in SQL Alchemy is actually to have another table for the relationships. And so that's we are moving data from one place to another. That's why we need this online migration, like online data migration. And basically, what this does is looking for the non-migrated consistency groups. It has all the functionality for limiting the number of consistency groups modified in one hit. So we can apply, for example, the online data migration through all the, for example, night and that converts 100 records at once. And then we are iterating over the consistency groups we've got. We are getting them again. If it's not here, then no problem. It probably got deleted. And we are checking the status to be. I'm not really sure if that's needed, but to be sure that we are not modifying something that's lying somewhere in the cinder volume. So it makes it, I think, more safe. And then we are doing the actual conversion. So we are taking volume type IDs and adding them to the new table as CG volume types, right? Simply then we are saving the object, counting that we've converted one object and returning. So that will be exposed to the administrator through the no-cinder manage command. So there will be online data migrations, I think. That's the same as Nova does it. So there's some. Yeah.
So in Newton, we had this change for one particular field in CG, right? And we exposed this method. It's a pretty generic name. So what happens in the next release where we need to do something similar to the same object? Is it the same function that we modify that we do both migrations?
No.
Or do we create another function?
That should be another function, and
but it's also migrating consistency.
And this is only through one release, right? This can be removed after a release.
So you replace the contents of this function in the next release?
You can do.
With the
This function will delete at the beginning of the next release. Then if you add a new one in, you automatically reuse it.
I think where Walt's trying to get to is, maybe the next one should be called migrate existing group data to, maybe it should be bumped.
Maybe then the
If
name
you
is
delete it, then
generic. Okay.
it's going to get
I'm trying to understand the semantics of what we're supposed to do between releases if we're modifying something
Yeah,
similar.
at 3 releases, we might have our third migrate, the group data might be weird. Like,
Maybe I should talk to
We'll just
volume type there.
or just, well,
That's
a
what-
version, make it data 2 or data Mitaka or data, Newton or something like that.
Make it generic and copy the way C block and migrate works, and just give it a version number to get
Yeah.
upgrade, just like you do with C block and migrate upgrade. DB upgrade or whatever, DB sync. Just make it, I mean,
So also the other thing is you may have other upgrades or migrations that you need to do within release 2. Do you have to do every single one manually, or can you say, hey,
No, but
upgrade these
there's
two?
one generic command. So I borrowed that from Nova. They actually introduced one generic command that does all the migrations, the online data migrations.
So is that what is exposed to this?
Yeah, that's
command, not this.
No,
particular name?
that's only the internals.
Okay, so then maybe the name doesn't really matter at all, other than code reviews and.
Just if you keep seeing this same method over several releases, but it's different each one because
That's really confusing.
That's just
I
weird.
like Corey's idea of using version numbers like we kind of used to, then I don't know.
Maybe that's a good idea.
Then you get collisions, which is what we had in the past too. Well, you're gonna
Actually,
get collisions.
I'm hoping that this is rare situation when we need the online data migration, right? So,
Still, I mean, it's nice to.
yeah, I can come up with an idea. Okay. We've gone through the code. So that's converting the data. So in the next release, well, we have a new place populated with the data, old place still populated with the data. So we can still write to both places as and it's reading from the old place. But we can read from the new place, which is fine. Then in B, we can remove the old column from the new model and write on new place only. Read also from the new place. And O is still writing to the old place, so it relies on presence of that column, so we can delete the column, drop the column only when we have no whole services to deploy. Okay. That's the code template shown. Yeah, so about the RPC API and compatibility, the thing is that new manager must be able to message from the older service, and the new RPC API must be able to downgrade messages. So that's how we probably see. For example, here we've added the volume parameter to the RPC method. So if it's not, because an older service extended for us, then we should fetch it to the DB API, just like it was done before. That's in manager, and that's in the RPC API. It's a little complicated, but the most important part is here, where we decide if the version we are capped on is lower than 1.32. Then we cannot send volume over the wire, and we are not doing that. Okay, so that's the target there. So the thing how it works now is that the services can detect the services report their version, their RPC version, and their version of objects. Yeah, newer services can detect that older services are running deployment and can downgrade the messages and the objects, right? So this is what it is called. And same goes with the also version objects. So the manager needs to be able to receive older ones, and new RPC API must be able to downgrade objects to be understood by the older version of services. So this is an example where we are removing a redundant field. So I've actually made up, but we should probably clean up the request spec. Okay, so basically we are in the object make compatible method. If we will implement it, then all the infrastructure we have with the RPC API and objects will automatically downgrade the object version when sending to the other services. So simply we can re-add the field with removed when sending to the services that are requiring it. There's one more thing to show. Let me try and see if it works. Not very well. I don't know what's happening. This is very weird, huh? Okay, let me try to open it in a different editor. But basically, what I want to say is that we need to aggregate the set of object versions, different object versions. So, for example, we need to know that Mitaka understood object volume in a version 1.0 and snapshot in a version 1.1, for example. So we need to aggregate all the version numbers into one number, and we've also created an infrastructure for that. And it requires us to bump the version history of objects every time we bump a version of an individual object. And I wanted to show how it looks like in. So it's placed in objects base 5. Nice. Oh, and now it works when I've opened the other one. All right. So there's this object version history object or class, and it just keeps the list of all the objects we are utilizing and sending through the RPC in Cinder, and any change needs to add any change of individual object version needs to add a new version to the history. So now when running 1.3, and we know that we have services that are running 1.0, then we know to which object versions to downgrade individual objects. So there's a unit test that is enforcing that version bump. So if you hit it failing, then you need to update the object versions here in the object.base 5. The changes are additive. So 1.3 means here that the service is 1.3, and all others are like in 1.2. So I think that's it. Yeah, there's also this common sense I've said that we need to make sure that our logic is able to handle all the services in the deployment. So that's from the developer's perspective. Yeah, we have that. We have that. Not hacking chats, but unit tests. Okay, so are we going to have a break and then we get back to roadmap? Oh, we stopped at the lunch. Yep. Oh, cool. It is.
That may be a silly question.
Yeah.
Why isn't that grouping of different objects?
You know what?
Object has its own version.
You know when we talk about testing,